Welcome to the Here's Waldo podcast, where we sit down with top visionaries and creatives in the video game industry. Together, we'll unravel their journeys and learn more about the path they're forging ahead. Now, let's get started with the show.
I'm Lizzie Mintos, founder and CEO of Here's Waldo Recruiting, a boutique video game recruitment firm. This is the Here's Waldo podcast. In every episode, we dive deep into conversations with creatives, founders, and executives about what it takes to be successful. You can expect to hear valuable lessons from their journey and to get a glimpse into the future of the industry. This episode is brought to you by Here's Waldo Recruiting, a boutique recruiting firm for the video game industry. We value quality over quantity, transparency, communication, and diversity. We partner with companies, creatives, and programmers to understand the why behind their needs. We provide a white glove experience that ensures a win-win outcome. Before introducing today's guest, I want to give a big thank you to Wallace Poulter for introducing us. Wallace is an amazing connector and just knows everybody in the industry. So thank you so much. Today we have David Fox with us. In 1982, David Fox was a founding member of Lucasfilm Games, or LucasArts. During his 10 years at Lucasfilm, he worked on Rescue on Fractalus, Labyrinth, Maniac Mansion, Zack McCracken, and the Alien Mindbenders, and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the graphic adventure. More recently, David joined Ron Gilbert's Terrible Toy Box team on Thimbleweed Park and the recently released Return to Monkey Island as a lead game programmer. David currently heads up Electric Eggplant, where he's adapting his 2013 Rube Works, the official Rube Goldberg Invention Game for AR/VR. Let's get started. Thanks so much for being here. So glad Wallace could connect us. I want to start, no surprise, to talk about your early days. You were employee number 2 when it was still Lucasfilm Games. Can you tell everybody a bit about what that was like?
Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me to be on your show. Yeah, that was pretty amazing. It took me a few years to realize that I actually belonged there. I had major imposter syndrome and was sure that any day someone would find out that that they made a huge mistake in hiring me because I didn't have the qualifications or something. It was definitely a dream to work at that company ever since I saw Star Wars when it first came out in 1977. And in fact, my wife and I were thinking about moving to a place where housing was less expensive, like in Oregon. And I got really sad when I thought, hey, if I did that, I never could work for Lucasfilm. So maybe we should just stay in Marin County where Lucasfilm is actually based, which we happen to live. And it worked out. So I was working on, I had finished a book called Computer Animation Primer. And around that same time, a friend told me that Lucasfilm Games was starting as a new group within the computer division was going to open up and start doing games. And all of a sudden there was something in the company that I was qualified to be a part of. And I called up the head of the computer division, which was Ed Catmull, who I actually had talked to when I was researching the state-of-the-art end of the computer animation spectrum for the book had just finished. And he told me they had just hired Peter Langston to head the group and would let him know I was interested. And the other coincidence was that my book was, the second half of the book was doing animation on the Atari 800 computer. And Atari was the company that gave Lucasfilm $1 million to start their new group with the idea that they would do games for that computer. So I had some credentials in the game. I had published a game and I was local and I was enthusiastic. And the other qualification, which is really strange, was that they didn't want people who actually had a huge game design history. They didn't want people who had worked in large game companies because they kind of wanted to reinvent how games were produced. So I qualified there too. I never worked for a large company. So everything just fell into place. It was actually,
Wow.
I think, the second outside employee hired and the third one because one other person transferred from inside the computer division doing what he was doing over to our group. So it's still right in the beginning.
And how did you get over your imposter syndrome, or what
I
event led you to
probably,
getting over it?
yeah, it probably was after we actually finished the first game and I realized I could actually do it. That I mean, I was working on this game. It was probably at least 6 months in before I realized I was the project leader on it. I mean, we didn't have those terms yet. So there was no established, like, well, this is actually your game. You could do what you want. And I said, oh, okay. So kind of like grabbing the reins a little more than I had been maybe. And when we finished it and it was great and it got amazing reviews and I said, okay, I can actually do this. I guess they were right in hiring me. So that was good.
Did you think that it was going to do well? Did you know that it was going to do well, or was that a surprise?
No, I think we knew. I mean, we knew we had come up with a technology that no one had ever used in a game at the time. My office mate when I first joined was a guy named Lauren Carpenter, who was known in the computer graphics industry as really being the first person to do fly through mountainous terrains made out of fractals in computer graphics. And he worked on that part of the Star Trek II Wrath of Khan movie that showed the Genesis effect of flying through this terraformed landscape. So one of the first things I asked him as an office mate was, hey, do you think it's possible to do fractals on a 8-bit Atari 800 computer? And he kind of laughed and said, no, it wouldn't be possible. And then I guess he took it as a challenge and said, well, maybe there's a way. And he borrowed one of our Atari 800 computers and the manuals and learned 6502 assembly language, learned the innards of the Atari 800 and all the graphics processor stuff. And really, like in a few days, came back with a working demo of flying through a landscape. And I mean, she's brilliant. I mean, he ended up as the whole computer division ended up as Pixar that Steve Jobs bought, and Lauren was their chief scientist for quite a while. So he was, again, great timing, great luck in having him as an office mate. I never would have had that opportunity to ask that. So he was put on loan to our game for several months so he could refine the code that he had written. And then, we had other people who could, Charlie Kellner, who really took that code and added flight dynamics to it so you could use a joystick, fly around in the landscape. And I did a lot of the gameplay design and implementation and just really good team. So when it was done, it was so far ahead of what any other computer game had looked like. I mean, there were flight simulators from Microsoft at the time had a frame rate of like maybe 3 or 4 frames per second. And we were
Wow.
doing about double that on a probably less powerful computer. And it made it, really feel like you were flying through this landscape. So it was groundbreaking. Also, one other thing which probably helped, there's this guy named George Lucas who worked at the company.
Yeah.
And he actually, when both my game and Ballblazer, which was the other game that we had released at the same time, it was starting up in parallel. He came by one morning to do like a little play test to see what we were doing, and he sat down and played the game in my office for about 20 minutes and had some really good feedback. One of which was he wanted to see more tension and suggested that one of the aliens that were on this landscape, in this planet that you were fighting, you're trying to rescue pilots from, would maybe every once in a while, when you landed to pick up a pilot to rescue him, maybe it was an alien in disguise who would come and then start smashing on your windshield and break through your plane's window. And we kind of thought about, could we do that? And we actually came up with a way to do it. And for a lot of people, besides the fractal landscape, that's what the game's remembered for, is really one of the first games with a real jump scare. Because we convinced Atari not to mention this anywhere in their advertising.
Oh,
And so it was alluded to in the manual that there's something that happened to one of the pilots who was rescuing people, but we never showed any imagery of it. And the first, I believe, 7 levels, it never happened. So you kind of got used to playing the game and kind of getting into automatic mode. Then all of a sudden this thing happens and it like freaked people out. And I still get stories of people like falling off of their chair or yelling or having, really, obviously this is like 35, 40 years ago, but having really intense reactions when they first encountered this alien jumping up and smashing through their window. And then stories of things that never happened in the game, like, I remember the picture of the alien reaching around with his hand and grabbing my face, and that never happened, but they imagined it because of the sound effects that were happening at the same time. So that was pretty. I have to thank George for that inspiration. So a lot of great connections there to make the game, I guess, memorable.
what a superstar team. Okay, so you shipped your first game, you're 2 years in, but you were there for 10 years. Tell me about the evolution of the company, because it's hard to grow and it's hard to continue success when you grow. So how is that possible?
Yeah, well, we had a really unique situation in that most startups, but in any company, in the game industry, for example, are have limited funds. They have like hard deadlines for the games to come out in order to get the money for the next game. And we were inside this company which had plenty of money because this was 1982. It was right after Empire Strikes Back and right before Return of the Jedi came out. And the company had enough money to keep us going for a long time without requiring us to really carry our own weight. And so we had the freedom to experiment, to be more of a research group initially, and try things that maybe were risky, that may or may not pay off, but they didn't have to pay off because we were getting the experience in interactive and storytelling. We, for the first 2 games, in fact, we were, I think, feeling really intimidated that here we are at Lucasfilm and, where we expected to do the equivalent of, Star Wars on our first time out. And what they told us was, no, don't worry about it. These are throwaway games. If they work, great. If they don't, we will have learned something about the development process. So we didn't have that much pressure initially to come up with something brilliant. We just did something we were passionate about, and it worked out really well.
Yeah.
Then the group, grew to 15 people, 20 people. We eventually moved to Skywalker Ranch, and we were there for 4 years. And generally during that period, I was really there from 82 to 92, but during the first 8 years when I was doing games for the home, teams tended to be relatively small. Maybe 3 to 5 people was pretty typical. And
that's so funny to think about compared to today.
Yeah, and development cycles, 9 months maybe for a game. We really had really limited storage. You really couldn't do massive games. So a lot of the time was, how do you squeeze it into the storage we had, as opposed to adding all sorts of different animation assets that we couldn't afford to have on the floppy disk or a cartridge or whatever. So very different focus. We took a unique approach where we were using first a mini computer as the target, as the development system, and then having it use a serial port to download to the target machine, or eventually Sun Microcomputer Systems workstations to do it. So we had the money to have fairly powerful Unix-based development environments, as opposed to developing directly on the target machine. It took a while before PCs were powerful enough, like maybe the end of the 80s, where those became the development environment, where we could actually do that and it would work. So having funds to do things like that was also probably really unusual in the industry at that time. And also having being initially we were part of the computer division, so having the sophistication of being a Unix-based company with lots of mini computers and very solid IT department and all that was already taken care of. So even though we were a small group, the support stuff for the company was part of Lucasfilm. So we didn't need to have like our own secretarial pool or our own maintenance pool or our own IT department or any of that. Was all company related. So that also meant that we were just part of the overall, part of the overhead, I guess.
Yeah, kind of the best of both worlds. You're a lean startup. It's so funny to think about that size of team making a game today. I mean, think about how much games cost and the cycle and how often they get thrown out. It's really a whole different world.
Very different.
But maybe there's something that can be learned from your days to how it is today.
Well, it's still possible, but the biggest team I worked on was the most recent game, Return to Monkey Island. And there's probably maybe a couple dozen people on the core team, maybe another 10 people or so that did other work that came in and out of the project, but weren't part of the core team. But it's still relatively small compared to like a AAA game with hundreds and hundreds of people on it and years and years.
Thousands, maybe, and hundreds of millions of dollars.
Right. And I've never worked on a game like that. And I don't think I'd ever want to. I don't think I'd want that kind of pressure. So I'm happy with small groups.
But sometimes I think that you can be a little bit more agile when you're a small group and you can follow your own rules and you don't have the constraints. And it is interesting because you see very large corporations who are brimming with additional cash, but can't really make an effective game to save their lives. Yeah. So it's interesting.
Well, the other huge benefit I think we had were two other ones. When I first started working on Rescue on Fractalus, I wanted it to be a Star Wars game. And that's what I was picturing, was like flying in the Star Wars universe, like an X-Wing or something. And within a day or two of coming up with the concept, I found out that we couldn't do anything in the Star Wars universe because all the rights to Star Wars games had been sold to other companies already. Atari had it for the arcade market, and Kenner/Parker Brothers had it for the home market. And so all the games that came out were from Parker Brothers. And what that meant was that after the initial disappointment, the positive part meant that we were forced to use our own original IP, come up with our own ideas.
Yeah.
We didn't, since we weren't doing anything that company really had history on, we didn't have a lot of attention put on us to, say from George, for example, to, micromanage maybe. I know later maybe in the 2000s, when they were doing a lot of Star Wars stuff, he was definitely involved and had control over the designs, and heard stories of things that didn't go really well because of his, wanting certain things to happen after production had been completed on something. So we were lucky that he left us alone. I don't think he really came in and looked at games other than that first time with the first two games. So we had a lot of freedom, a lot of creative freedom. We could develop our own internal style and ended up with a lot of humor and quirkiness that kind of became a hallmark of the games we were doing.
Yeah.
And, we knew stuff was supposed to be PG, but we could, we could, other than that, and no one ever came in and said, you have to change that because it's inappropriate. We just kind of knew. The other was that we really didn't have a marketing department for quite a while. So we didn't have marketing coming in and saying, we need this game to do this. And and here's the marketing deadline and here's the schedule. And it was really driven by the designers and the project leaders. I should say project leaders / designers. It's usually the process would be one of us would come up with an idea. We would write up a 2 or 3 page concept document, pass it around to the other project leaders, designers, get the thumbs up, and then we would become the project leader and assemble the team to do the game. So it was all driven from the creative people and not from from upper management or marketing. They just say, we need another game, and say, okay, I have an idea. And say, great. And that was, I mean, when I started hearing or understanding how the rest of the industry worked, I think that's why you ended up with a lot of games that maybe put lots of money in, but they really weren't driven from the inspiration of the creatives. So another plus for us to be able to come up with our own way of doing things.
So I'm hearing that you think that the best way to make a game, or the way that you have found it to be most effective, is to have the creatives run it and have less input from other people and let the creatives kind of do their thing.
Yeah. I mean, clearly there have to be some constraints, like, about when the game should be ready for. And if you're a good project leader, you could probably stick to the time. I don't remember ever being told a budget. We weren't really given budgetary constraints during the time I was there. I'm sure that came later. As games got more complicated and more expensive, then they had to do that. And that kind of happened with adventure games. Is we had more space for either the floppy disks got bigger, the storage medium or CD-ROMs or whatever they were shipped on. Then you have a lot more space for animation and assets, and those are really expensive, and the budgets went up, and then you had to have more control over how long the project would last. But I was gone by then, so I didn't have to worry about that.
Okay, so you left, and then walk me through where you went and what happened.
So I worked on those. The last game I worked on at LucasArts was Indiana Jones: The Last Crusade, and that was really fun. That was really the first major IP game that we worked on that was owned by Lucasfilm. And because it was based on a film, we did have a deadline that was pretty tight because we wanted to get the game done by around the same time the film came out. And so we brought 3 project leaders together to work on it, 3 designers / project leaders, which we had never done before. So myself, Ron Gilbert, and Noah Falstein, and worked really focused on the game to get it done. And we missed the deadline by maybe a month or 2, but it wasn't terrible because the movie was in the theaters for a really long time, so we could still tie in with it. Then I was asked to be the director of operations for a year, and by then I think we had grown from the 5 to 10, 15 to 65 people, and had never really set up any kind of a hierarchy within the company. It was very flat. So everyone reported to one person. So,
that's too many pizzas, as they say at Amazon.
So I ended up helping to set up some kind of a hierarchy and getting heads of departments hired, and various departments set up in that way. And I was directly responsible for the programmers and the project leaders. And it was not really something I wanted to do, because I much prefer doing games than management like that. But the carrot was our general manager, Steve Arnold, promised me that I could do something in the area of location-based entertainment or immersive entertainment once the year was up. I could set things up, hire someone to replace me, and then move on to immersive. And he kept his promise. And so after a year of that, we ended up creating a new group within Lucasfilm called Rebel Arts and Technology, or RAT for short. Perfect. And it was kind of a skunk works, very small group. We had a partnership with Hughes Simulation, which did professional flight simulators for airlines and for military. And the idea would be to do like a flight simulator based game. And I was in charge of the game design and the creative part of it. And Hughes was responsible for all the technical part. And we also did the design of the simulator, but what the pod would look like, what the design would look like based on what had to go inside of it, with Hughes specifications, like how many projectors and things like that. And it was a Star Wars game, the first one we chose to do. So I actually got to do a Star Wars game. And, you're in a pod. It was a pod. Pod was about maybe 12 feet across. So 2 seats in it. There was a large window in front, 120-degree field of view. So you're kind of looking at like this. There were 3 video projectors overhead to create the imagery. So it was very big, and they had a mirror. So when you look out the window, you were focusing like maybe 100 feet away. So it felt like you were in this, flying through these, space, really huge landscapes. And we had like a surround sound system, and we had an Amiga computer for the heads down display for, giving you like a terrain map of what you were seeing, instrumentation. And it was a super fun game. We got it working. It was multiplayer, so there were other stations that could fight against you, playing other X-Wings or TIE fighters. And unfortunately, it was too expensive for that time for any theme parks to actually want to bring it in. I think, we were using flight simulator technology, which was way more expensive than home computers. And it just never actually. It was shown at the IAPA show, which is the Interactive Amusement Park Association conference. So they showed it, and then, as far as I know, it never got sold beyond that. And by then, the guy Steve Arnold, who had got us going with our group, had left the company, and there wasn't anyone inside who was passionate about immersive. So they decided to close down our group, and that's when I left. When the group closed down, and by then I had the taste of what this could be like, what immersive entertainment could be like, and going back to like a 2D PC version of a game just felt like a huge setback. So I tried to find consulting gigs doing VR and immersive, and it was just too early, really. So I ended up switching to like online stuff and internet for a while until the technology caught up.
So I see that you spoke at a virtual reality conference in 1992 and gave a talk called Virtual Reality, It's Not the Technology. What was virtual reality then? Can you talk about what it was then, and then just the advancements you've seen since then?
Yeah, well, all the talk really at that time was about, the tech and people fretting that, it was too expensive or the frame rates were too slow, and the lag time when you move your head and having, you move your head and the picture kind of goes like this and pops into place, and interactions were, it was super expensive. And I knew that was a temporary problem. And rather than focusing on that, what can we focus on in terms of the experience, and figuring that would drive the technology after some time. I didn't expect it to take, 25 years before the prices came down, the technology got good enough so that it could actually be affordable for the home market, but that's what it took. So I kind of left that area. And I think everything I said in the talk was still true, just that it took way longer than I thought for it to catch up. I got to, I think really started playing with VR 5 or 6 years ago, when the tech came down to like in the $2,000 or $3,000 range, including, or maybe $4,000 when you include a PC with it. And then got really inspired when I went to the Facebook Connect conference in 2019, which is now called MetaConnect.
Yeah.
And got to try the Quest 1, and well, it wasn't called the Quest 1, but it was the first one, Oculus Quest.
Oculus, yeah.
Yeah. And
so many names: Facebook, Meta, Oculus, Reality Labs. What is it now?
And it's okay. We've now arrived. It's still not great, but I can see that the advancement from where it was before, and in the fact that it's a standalone headset, you don't have to have an expensive PC. this is the path. So I had done this game that came out in 2013 called Rube Works, which is based on Rube Goldberg's cartoons. We have a license to do a game based on Rube Goldberg's 1920s to 1930s or 40s cartoons of chain reaction machines. And I wanted to make a puzzle game where you would actually have to build his machines in the game. So it wasn't like as opposed to it being like a sandbox style game. There are specific puzzles for each level that you had to solve to build the machine. Simple way to open a window, or simple way to get fresh orange juice in the morning, which is typical of his thing. But of course, it wouldn't be simple, which is the joke. There'd be 10 or 15 objects that had to interact with each other to make the final thing happen. And we got funded for the game by Unity Games, which was a short-lived group within Unity, where they would decide they would do publishing themselves in addition to selling the development environment. And they paid for the development. I worked with Kalani Stryker and his group, his development company, to do the actual development, because I didn't have my own development company. And we delivered the game. I worked with Rube Goldberg's granddaughter. She was my co-producer on it, and she was great to work on with this. She said, "No, Rube wouldn't do it that way." Or her grandfather, she knew him, and so we could talk about how straight to the source, really. And game came out for mobile and desktop, and it's still out. I mean, it still sells, not huge numbers, but it's out there. So I went to the Meta Connect, or I guess it was then the Oculus Connect or Facebook, whatever it was called, conference in 2019, the Connect conference in 2019. And I saw this and realizing, okay, I already have a game that we have the rights to, because Unity Games ended up closing down after a few months and the rights reverted to us.
Oh.
That we could use for a VR game. And ended up funding this and started doing it, and got pretty far into it. And then the Return to Monkey Island project came up as an opportunity, and no way would I turn that down. So I jumped to do that and got to be on that team. And when that was over, when it shipped a year ago, that's when I moved back to Rube Works. And so right now, Rube Works VR is in beta, kind of a closed beta, and we'll open it up pretty soon, probably with a free first level that people can download for free and try. And it's going to be, it's for me, it was mostly I wanted to learn how to develop in VR, because I really didn't have direct experience in how to take my 2D game design experience and actually do it. And that's the best way to learn. So I just gave a talk at the GIC conference in Poland about, the process of taking a game design for a flat screen, like an iPad or a mouse-based desktop, and what were the obstacles we came into when we wanted to convert it into a 3D, immersive environment. And it's a great learning experience, and with a thing that I didn't expect. I mean, I knew it'd be fun, but the charm of actually seeing these objects where you can actually reach in with your fingers and your hand and pick up an object and move it around and bring it up close and inspect it like this, and then put it back and literally with your hands using hand tracking. It's just so wonderful compared to just having it at a distance where you're using a mouse or cursor to move things around.
Yeah.
And
VR is incredible.
You can describe it, and it's an emotional reaction. My wife has not been playing the game, and she tried it, and she picked up some of the characters. She started tearing up because it was so cute. And it was like, that never happened with the flat version. She said, "Oh, that looks great." So there's just something emotionally different about how it happens. So that's exciting.
That's really exciting. What do you think about the Apple Vision Pro? Will you develop a game for it next? Can you say?
I would love to. Well, I would love to, once we get this one working on the Quest and get in the store, we do have plans to bring it out to all the other VR platforms. Probably Steam first, just because that's the easy jump. But as an experiment, the thing about the way we did the game, the original game, you're looking into a room, and you could scroll around the room with your fingers or with a mouse, but you never see beyond the room. So should we do this as immersive, where you're in this big room where you're walking around? I said, no, that doesn't feel right. It's really more of a self-contained puzzle. So the idea was to use like a shadow box. So we have like this, what looks like a walnut wooden box. And inside the box, like a dollhouse, is the scene. And it's miniaturized. So the whole box is maybe 2 feet across. It's sitting on a desk in VR. Desk and the floor have nothing to do, they aren't really interactive. They're just there as props. So the idea of turning this into a mixed reality experience seems like an obvious next step, because you could then pick up the box, walk over to your table or your desk and put it down there. And then you're moving close, sitting on a chair, and then interacting with the objects, and then maybe put the box onto a shelf, a virtual shelf, where each level would be in its own box, and you pick up the next one and put it down, or maybe have that done automatically, but where you can actually see a shelf there on the wall with all the lit up levels that you've done and the locked ones that you haven't done yet. And just kind of lean into that part of it, because it doesn't really need to be in VR. It really is perfect for a mixed reality experience. So that's probably the next step. And that's exactly where the Apple Vision Pro lies and where its strengths are. So I don't know if we'll be the first out the door there. The development price is steep unless they provide headsets. I know you can use emulators and get pretty far with part of it with that. But it's definitely on our radar, and I'm super impressed. I mean, the thing that impressed me the most was listening to the experiences of people who tried it, as opposed to the people who looked at the specs of the thing and kind of poo-pooed it, and the pricing. But listen to the emotional response of people who actually tried it on and got to have that experience. Told me, okay, they've really solved a whole bunch of issues in mixed reality. And I'm an Apple fan from way back, so I know that they could do it. They put their attention to it. Now, of course, is how do you get the price down for normal people or real people to actually afford it?
Yeah, but just like any new piece of technology that comes out, it's always so expensive at first. That's just the way that it goes. This is V1.
Yeah, and I think it's a really interesting, they kind of took the Tesla approach in a way, where they ended up with the super expensive high-end experimental car, vehicle, whatever, and then brought it down to the masses. But showing, here's what the experience could be, if price wasn't an option, a problem, a barrier, and bring it down.
Pricing is interesting, though. I mean, an iPhone is $1,000, but everybody has one. So it's just, what is the demand? I'm not saying that everybody's going to have a Vision Pro, but I feel like a high price point makes it a more desirable item. And it's always, pricing is just fascinating.
Yeah. And when I bought my first iPhone, it wasn't $1,000. It was what, 300 or 400 maybe at the time, 500. So, but other phones at the time, I think, were probably less expensive. So I think Apple kind of trained us that if you really want this experience, here's what you get, what you have to do to pay for it.
Yeah.
I change my phones every 3 to 5 years. So it kind of makes sense then. So yeah, I should say to your listeners, if you are interested in participating in the beta for Rube Works, then you should definitely get in touch with me. It's going to be on App Lab. That's the name of the store that's like the secondary experimental store, where apps have a chance to go through multiple iterations and mature. And I guess if they shine, then they might be considered to be brought into the main store where most of the sales are done. But you have the space to have access to betas and a lot of feedback.
If you post on LinkedIn is my bread and butter as a recruiter, that you're doing it, you'll have a huge reach, and I'm happy to help project that for all of our listeners too. Yeah.
Good.
It's fun to be able to be a part of the process of developing a game and to be able to have input as a player as to what you want to see. And I feel like that's really a theme of the next generation of games. I mean, people are still going to make these massive titles for years and years, but there's so much UCG that can be done. And I just was at GamesBeat, which was wonderful. Shout out to the whole VentureBeat and GamesBeat community that made it possible. And I listened to a lot of talks, and that was the gist of many of them. I mean, people want to be able to create their own worlds, create their own realities, or just work alongside developers and just have early access and be able to see, or open beta, what you really, really like and what you don't like, and be able to make a game your own. I feel like that's one of the more exciting themes these days in games.
Having a lot of people try a game at this stage is also really helpful, because I've long ago habituated into a certain way of interacting with it. And I say, okay, it works, no problems.
Yeah.
And then I start hearing people, I can't get a hint from this object, or I can't pick up the object. And I say, how could that be a problem? And then I look at it and say, do a capture of your video of doing it. And I see what they're doing, and they're doing something very different than what I do. And it's not wrong what they're doing. It's just not something I had ever considered someone would do in that way, because there's a hand gesture. Right now, to get a hint from an object, you have to keep your finger like this and point it and touch the object to get a hint. And I saw people doing this and then doing that to get the hint. And as soon as they bent their finger, it went out of the mode where it was looking for hints. Or they go in like this and they start turning their finger, which we assumed you had to keep your finger straight. Otherwise, we were afraid we'd trigger hints all the time whenever you moved your hand around the environment. And, how are they picking up? Are they picking up like this? Some people, for me, this is how you point. Some people point like this. And I never considered that. And, or trying to use a hand like that, or can you grab to pick up the object? And so there's a lot of other ways of interacting that make total sense that we have to support, be more lenient about what we accept as a gesture for it to work. And that really you can't do from, 2 or 3 people doing it.
Right. I think that's why it's important to have different people on your team that come from different places too, because if you all come from the same studio and you're all taught the same way, you're all going to do the same thing and have the same thought process. Yeah. But like you said about early days where you had so many people from kind of outside of the industry that made something really spectacular because they all just had this different approach to it.
Yeah.
I just talked to someone who was employee 47 at Riot and just talking about the early days of Riot, and they had the very same thought process too.
Yeah, things were still in flux, and we knew we could change the culture. Well, that was something else. So the culture we had was probably inherited from a larger company.
Yeah.
So in a real startup, then the culture is going to probably come from the top. I'm sure it did for us too, but it was already established. But that's a huge part of having a good gaming experience. In Return to Monkey Island, I thought that was probably one of the best teams I worked on. Just a lot of, freedom to communicate ideas, knowing that it was safe to throw out ideas, that you would be listened to. Good ideas were constantly being pulled into the game and used. There's an example I love where the artist who did one of the rooms, which was a fish shop, had an idea for a gag of one of these little fish would maybe every time you came in the room, it might have moved a little closer to the door, and eventually you would escape. And it's, oh, that's wonderful. So I, coded it up, and I think it takes like 30 times or something for you to enter the room. And every time it just moves like a few pixels, and you probably don't even notice it moved the first 5 or 6 times. But it ended up being, I think, an achievement that if you actually let the fish escape, you get achievement for that. And it was just, fun little hidden things that make the game feel richer when you have that kind of openness to listen to other ideas.
How do you think that any of our listeners could either advocate that for that as employees or create that as leadership or business owners?
Yeah, well, there's like this tension, because on the one hand, you probably want one person or maybe 2 people who are, I call it the keeper of the vision, the ones who own the design and are the filters for what goes and doesn't go into the game. And I think you have to respect. If you were working on in a project where you didn't respect the design abilities of the person at the top, it'd probably be a really tough project to work on, because you'd always be, if you had an idea and they didn't like it, you'd probably think that they were being stupid, they were short-sighted. Where if you respected the people and they said, no, I don't think that, I'm not going to use that, it's not a personal affront. It's just like, that, because sometimes things would go through and sometimes they wouldn't. It was, I think you have to be able to know that when you come up with an idea that it may or may not make it all the way through, and that's okay. But you can still do it, and you would be listened to. Or there might be some version of that idea that makes it through that triggers something else. But I think the worst game I ever worked on was not for Lucasfilm, LucasArts project. It was for a company I worked at for a short time. And this was all really confused, like who the keeper of the vision was. And as a result, as a designer on a project, it was out of my hands a lot as to what actually made it through. And it was pretty frustrating and very demoralizing, and it's not a great experience. So I think it's really the best games, I think, maybe are ones where there's a creative person, but one who actually listens to feedback, as opposed to just being driven and thinking that they have it right.
Yeah. So if you're an employee, perhaps assessing how leadership takes feedback from all levels.
Mm-hmm. They're clear. I mean, if you're looking for a job, that's definitely something that I think people should be asking. Like, what is management like?
Yeah.
When I was looking for this job, back before I got hired for it, I actually talked to someone who had some experience with the head of the company and gave me a huge warning. Said, this guy at the head of the company is someone you really have to watch out for. And having come from Lucasfilm, where it was such an idyllic situation, I couldn't imagine what the person was saying could actually be true. I didn't have that imagination to imagine terrible leadership. And I learned that the person was was actually understating what the situation was.
Wow.
So, those red flags should be listened to. And, the idea of a dream job may not be a dream job if you find out that management is toxic, really.
Yeah. They say that you don't quit your company, you quit your boss. And I think that's really true. I mean, nowadays, I think people really care about the values that the overall company has much more than in the past. But your leadership is so important. And
But it filters down from the top. So
yeah, it does. Intentional or not, you build the culture.
Yeah. I mean, I think my example was thinking of a dysfunctional family where you look at the kids and why are they messed up? And then you look at the parents and realize that they're the ones that are being dysfunctional. It just filters down to the kids and to the pets and to everyone who lives in that house. And it's really hard to separate I mean, you can try to put buffers in there, but you're going to have pressure against those people in the middle to do things a certain way to keep, to follow the vision of the people at the top. And if that's broken, then it's going to filter down that way too.
Yeah. And games is one of the most collaborative industries.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important that all the pieces work together.
Yeah.
But it's hard to discern that. And I think as a recruiter, people get interviewed, but don't interview the company quite as much, especially now. And maybe they're so happy to have a job interview. They don't want to blow it. They want the job, so they don't want to ask the hard questions.
No, I totally understand, especially when you're starting out or things have been tough and you haven't been able to find a job, that you maybe start rationalizing that, like it couldn't be that bad, or I'll just ignore that, or I can make it better. And, the idea of trying to transform a company from the bottom or from somewhere that you're coming into it, it's probably not going to be successful. Probably be pretty difficult experience.
But it will build character. I worked at a very interesting company, and I downloaded the app Headspace so I could do meditation in my car. I'd listen to plinky music at work and just get through the day by whatever means necessary. Take walks. I had a lot of different strategies, exercise on my lunch break, that kind of stuff. But I think sometimes when you work for a bad company, not that you should seek it out by any means, or you work for a leadership that doesn't align with your values and you have this experience, at least for me owning a business, it's really shown me what I don't want and led a very clear path to that. So, I mean, jobs are kind of just like dating, right? You go on some dates, you date someone who's not really that great. It's a bad experience, but you learn what you don't want and you learn what leader you don't want to be. So I think both in the end take you where you need to go. Obviously avoid it if you can, but it's inevitable. You're going to have some challenging people wherever you go.
Right. And I think it's having a bad experience. Then you kind of created some, things that signposts, warning signs. You become super attuned to that certain behavior that you had as a negative thing, where if you start seeing it, you say, warning sign, red flag. Sure. I got to steer clear of this, or this is not going to work. And looking back here, I didn't have any of those comparisons of what to watch out for until it happened.
So if you were to do it over again, you would listen to the advice of somebody who said that the leader was toxic, or do more due diligence? How could our listeners avoid that?
I would have not taken the job. I wouldn't have pursued it.
Yeah.
Said, okay, got it. I know what this is like, and I know how bad it can go, and I better steer clear.
Yeah. Well, you learn and you built character, just like Calvin and Hobbes says.
Yeah. And fortunately, the next experience I had was much more Lucasfilm-like in terms of having really good management at the top and people who communicated. And so I kind of said, okay, that was a fluke that I chose that, and I don't have to do that again. And I don't think I did. As a consultant, though, it's a really different story, because then you might be taking on a client who might be really difficult to work with. And and there you have, it's a whole different situation, because they're the client, and you're kind of working for them in that way, and you have to maintain professionalism. So I don't do that much anymore either. So I'm kind of lucky that I don't have to do that. But it could be really tough. I remember having a client where the person had a lot of ideas. Like, they're asking for ideas, but they never would take the ideas I had, and they kind of went down their path, ignoring it. And I could see where the end path was. Their project ended up not being anywhere as good as it could have been. But
but you learn throughout. I mean, I'm kind of a consultant in a way. I work with lots of different companies. I consult with them on their recruiting process. And you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. I can share what you should be doing, what you could be doing, how you could think of things and how you could approach things.
Mhm.
But there is a certain point where it just doesn't work. And that's okay. It's just like dating, right? You go on a few dates. It was really nice to meet you. I had a great experience, but ultimately this isn't what I'm looking for.
Right.
That's fine.
If the goals don't align, then if you can find that out, the sooner you can find that out, then the faster you can move on to find
Who wants to do
a relationship. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, work is just relationships, dating, or just getting to know people and learning to pick up on patterns as an employee, as a consultant, as anything, an employer, right? Who's a good employee? Who's a good employer?
Right.
Who do I want to go on a date with? Start to see these things. I have one final question for you.
Okay.
What do you think is going to be the killer app that brings VR even more mainstream?
Rube Works.
Okay. That was not a setup, I promise.
No, I don't know. I think there's a huge issue with VR in that a lot of people have an amazing first experience and it's a mind-blowing experience. And then the friction to actually do it again becomes too great to really keep using it. So a lot of people have VR equipment from a year ago that they just never take out anymore.
Perhaps.
And
that's me.
Yeah. And so
I need to, though.
What?
I need to. I haven't taken it out for a while. But
yeah, right.
It's overdue.
And it's because I think part of it's because, the setting it up, finding a space, if you need a space, or having a game or project or whatever it is you do on it, which is compelling enough to drive you to do it over and over again. There are games and things that have come out that are, I think, must see, and that move the whole art forward a lot. But I don't know that there's enough out there that makes you like equivalent to sitting in front of the TV and watching 5 different shows you really love. I don't know if there's enough that make that work for you. There's also even though it's way better, it's still not all that comfortable to have the thing on your head.
It's true.
So it might not be the app; it might be continued evolution of the technology to the point where it really becomes transparent to the user to wear it. And I think Apple is in the right direction with their hand gestures, so you don't have to have. There are no controllers, and that their system is set up well enough that you don't need to have a controller and have to go pick up your controller, get it charged.
Yeah.
So it's like gradually removing all the friction points to make it easier to pop in, and then I guess stories that are as compelling as some of the shows I like watching on TV, that where I do want to go back and do it. And and I mean, the truth is I'm not a huge gamer. I much prefer creating games. That's my big game, is creating the games and then seeing the experience afterwards. But for people who play a lot of games, I think they have to be ever evolving and getting better and different. And how many first person shooters can you play and still have it be really rewarding? So breaking out of the obvious types of games to create, because these have been successful before, the ones that kind of break the mold and try experimental stuff. And maybe a bunch of games should be 15-minute experiences where you just do it and it's like really inexpensive or free, and those that move the art forward. So like watching, do I want to commit to watching like 10 episodes of a series, or 5 seasons of 10 episodes, or 15 episodes of a series? Sometimes I just want to watch a one-off 15-minute short on TV and not have to make the commitment of doing it. So I think in games, I'd like to see more of those.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was chatting with a woman at GamesBeat, and in her talk, she said that maybe games will be like social media. You people scroll and they don't want to see the same content over again. They want to see a variation of the thing that they like that's a little bit different, but they don't want to live in it forever. They just want to have this experience that then passes them by, which is interesting too.
Yeah.
Okay, where can people go to learn more about you, maybe test your game?
Well, probably the easiest way to reach me now is through my website, electriceggplant.com. And there's a contact button. I used to be on Twitter. I'm pretty much not there anymore, although I'll still check for messages. So that's a way to reach me, at David B. Fox. And that's the same handle that I use on pretty much everywhere else I am. Mastodon, Blue Sky, just got a Threads account, Facebook. There's just too many. It's like, really, where did that person talk to me on?
Trust me, yes.
Yeah. But on my website, it's definitely a way to reach out to ask about playtesting. And I'm happy to invite more people there.
Good. We've been talking to David Fox, who is employee number 2 at Lucasfilm Games and is currently working on his own game at Electric Eggplant. You can visit his website, electriceggplant.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. That was fun.
Thanks so much for listening to the show this week. To catch all the latest from Here's Waldo, you can follow us on LinkedIn. Be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes. We'll see you next time.